Welcome, everyone. I know we're going to give it a second as people join and get let in the room, but we're so thankful you're here on your lunchtime or whatever you might be doing today. Give it a second to trickle in. So just so you all know, this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to leave because you're on lunch or you need to sign off for any reason, we're recording it and then it will be available. We'll send it out and then it will be on our website as well. So we'll let you know and share out the recording afterwards. So we're glad that you're here and thank you for joining. Tatiana, does that look like everyone from the waiting room?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today. We're really excited. This is our first webinar for part of our webinar series. So for some of you who may not know about Data for Indigenous Justice, I'll just share a short amount before handing it off to our speaker. But Data for Indigenous Justice homes a database tracking missing and murdered Indigenous people in Alaska. And this organization was founded from a rally and from Alaska Native people coming together and sharing names because previously there wasn't a way to pull data on this issue. And so that's the origin of our story. And I like to share that, especially in times like today where rallies are being, trying to be banned and all these other things. And so I just want to emphasize the power of coming together. And for also, I love this idea of this webinar. I'm so glad that Kyle's willing to be here. Some of our early efforts as well before this organization was started was working with community members who were trying to also use FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests to get information about missing and murdered loved ones. And there were lots of hurdles and reasons that people were being denied their FOIA requests. And so we worked together and we kind of compiled our FOIA requests together and said, okay, let's read the statutes here. Let's figure out how to get this information together. And so we worked with people in the community, and actually I see some of them online here today. And we wordsmithed the FOIA requests, and we were able to flood the system and get back information that truly belongs to the people and that should be public information. And so, again, I really see the power in making sure that there's transparency in agencies and that people have information to what they need to work cases and have justice for their families. So again, thank you for joining us. And Kyle, thank you for being here with us. And, you've done important work in our community on this issue and around violence and public safety in Alaska. And I just want to uplift you for that because so many times before we had data and even now, we could point to those articles and say, hey, look, this is happening. And sometimes that was the only source where families were being heard and where we could say, this is a real issue. And so I just want to uplift you and thank you for all of the work that you've done listening to our families and putting out truth. I tell my staff a lot, like, we have to be bold and we have to be truthful and we're grounded in the truth. And so thank you so much for all of your work and being willing to share today. And I just want to also, can Tatiana and Antonia give everyone like a wave? And so you can introduce yourselves too real quick and just share what you do.
Sure. So my name's Antonia Onexet-Comac. I am the resource coordinator at Data for Indigenous Justice. I was the fellow all last year, and now I work here full time. And I'm happy that we are hosting Kyle. He's been a really amazing resource, not only for myself, but also for families that I point in his direction. So thank you, Kyle.
Hi, my name's Tatiana Tignor. I'm the program coordinator at Data for Indigenous Justice, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'm happy this is all coming together. It's great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it off to Kyle. And then I'm also going to turn off my video just to have less distractions here. But Kyle, thank you again for being here and being willing to share. And I'll hand it off to you.
Also, I'm going to jump in really quickly. I don't think there's the ability to chat, but there should be a Q&A box somewhere. I think Tatiana
thank
set it
you.
up that way.
Okay, well, I'll get started. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm honored to take part in this and excited to talk to everyone. I've got a presentation that I'm gonna load up and show. So I'm gonna share my screen, and I'm gonna turn off my camera to make sure my internet is working quickly, and I'm gonna go ahead and start that slideshow in a moment here. So I'm going to share my screen. My name is Kyle Hopkins. I'm a reporter for the Anchorage Daily News and for ProPublica. And for the past few years, I've been focused on covering criminal justice failures in Alaska, essentially. And I hope we are seeing my screen. Okay, I'm just gonna. So this is a session to talk about Alaska public records, specifically public safety records, and just what is available to you as a member of the public. And one thing Antonio and I were talking about earlier today is the idea that I work for a newspaper and am sitting here in a newsroom, but the rights that we have as news reporters are no different. And there's nothing additional to what just you have as members of the general public. You are entitled to all the records that newspapers and TV reporters are entitled to. Those laws are for you. The people who hold these records work for you. And so that's the starting place, is like, these are your records, and let's just talk a little bit about how to go about them, because it can sometimes be kind of a frustrating and long process to get these records that you are entitled to. So the law says you are owed public records. This is the law that we're talking about. It says it's Alaska Statute 4025-110. It says, unless specifically provided otherwise, public records of all public agencies are open to inspection by the public. So there are exceptions to that rule, and they're often cited when you ask for things. But the starting place is that records are meant to be open. They're meant to be public, and the government has to have a good reason to withhold that record from you. One thing I wanted to say early is just general advice, that we try and go by in our work is, it's just good to be a squeaky wheel. Humans are on the other end of these records requests, and they, like everyone, they're prioritizing their day. They're trying to get a lot of things. They probably have too much to do. They're probably overworked. And so if you're the person who's constantly asking for the record and reminding them, hey, remember that thing that I asked about, they're at some point, it's going to be easier for them to just give you that record than to keep dealing with you. And so I think it's just good to be a squeaky wheel, just politely, gently asking over and over and over again. You shouldn't have to ask that much, but sometimes you kind of do. So we'll start by talking about police records, because that's the starting place for a lot of the cases that you're going to be interested in. It starts with the police report, a 911 call, a police visit. There's a police officer who's going to be filling out a report and writing down what they're seeing, who's involved. And those records are some of the records that we're after. And I'm going to talk about open versus closed cases, because that's going to be really important in terms of what we can get our hands on. For you, just because Anchorage police are the largest, police department in Alaska, it's likely that that will be the department you're dealing with. They have a specific kind of online records portal that we'll want to walk through. And then we'll talk a little bit about requests to other departments before we get into talking about court records. And one thing, everyone's time is valuable. So I'd say that, like, one thing, when we get into court records a little bit later, one thing I wanted to talk about is, I think one of the more important things we're going to go over is, just in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of things have changed when it comes to public records. And so there are a couple of services. I'm going to be talking about something called True Filing that you can sign up for, that might save you a lot of time and money in terms of getting documents. So you don't have to go to the courthouse. You don't have to pay for records. So I'll try and get to that as quickly as I can. But in terms of police records, you have you have your basic police report. That's what that looks like. It's going to include all the basic information that every officer is writing down when they, come upon a scene or like are responding to a call. If the case is closed, that's a public record. You should expect to get that police report. Now, some of the information is going to be redacted for like privacy reasons, but if the case is closed, meaning, someone has been arrested and the case went to court and either ended a conviction or it was dismissed completely, it's now a closed case and that record is public. But if it's open, that's where things get trickier, because there is an exception in that state records law that says, law enforcement records that could reasonably be expected to interfere with enforcement proceedings can be withheld. So the police departments basically can say, look, if we make this public, it'll hurt our ability to solve this case. And that's what they often do say. But one thing we heard I spoke to APD records for this seminar, and they said, look, for MMIP family members, friends of family members, this is one way where you do differ from the news media. Like I'm generally looking for information to publish stories. You're looking for information about a loved one. APD records said, look, even when a case is open, you should ask for it anyway, because they might make exceptions for MMIP family and friends. And so I don't want to give the impression that if a case is closed, there's no way you can get it, because I do think you can get some of that information and you should ask for it. And the way that you ask for it is through something called the APD records portal. It looks like this. There's this, this presentation will be online. So you'll have links to these things, but when you get to the APD records portal, you're going to be setting up an account, and then you're going to be asking for specific information about a given case. I'm going to back up to one thing, and Antonia and I talked a little bit about this morning, was this idea that when you log onto the records portal and you're making your first request for information, it can be a little intimidating because it asks for all this information, and you might not. There's almost no way you're going to know all of these things, including, how would you know the APD case number that was assigned to, the incident that you're looking at if you've never gotten records about it before. So just fill out as much of this as you can, and I would encourage you to also call APD records and talk to them directly. One thing that we talked about a little bit is that if you can get someone on the phone and just, you've got a human on the other end of the line, and you're saying, look, I'm making this request. I'm interested in this particular case. Can you tell me the case number? I want to make this as fast as possible for both of us. So you want to give as much information in that request as you can. They want to have as much information as they can to quickly respond to your request. So it's always a really nice idea to just call someone up and have an advocate, on the phone walking you through that process. So I really encourage you, especially the first couple of times you make these requests, to call somebody and just, ask for help. When you are asking, at least with APD, when you're making these requests, one thing that APD records noted is that if you want written reports, you need to make one request for that. And if you want audio and video, when it comes to police records, they, when they're responding, they're wearing body cameras these days. They're recording all of their interviews. Those are all public records. The photos that they take, with some exceptions, are public records. And so it's likely that you're going to want that audio and video, that body cam footage. But just remember that you'll need to make a separate request for the audio and video. You'll have to kind of make two requests. And when it comes to the written reports, those are taking about 2 weeks to be processed. The audio, video, the dash cam footage, I went through this process recently. It's about a 6-month wait. So it's not a super fast process. It can also be expensive. For APD and other departments, you are looking at hundreds of dollars in charges for basically what they're doing is they're charging a fee per hour of research that they do in order to put this record together, to redact the parts that are considered private to process it. But when it comes to MMIP families, one thing we talked about with the city just within the last couple of weeks is that they were encouraging families, these, a $300 bill I mean, these are burdensome bills, right? So like you can request a waiver, a fee waiver. And one way to do that is after you make your request, you're going to get an automatic email. It's going to look something like this. You're going to make your request through the APD records portal. You're going to get an email that acknowledges you made the request, and it's going to have this reference number. It's going to have a number, this super long number that begins with an R. And then you can email the records department. You can email them at apdrecords@anchorageak.gov and say, hey, I just made this records request. Here's the number of the record of the reference number that I just got in the email. My name is so-and-so. I'm claiming indigency. Basically this is a financial hardship for me. You sign it. It's one sentence. I would encourage you to make that request in order to get those fees waived, because those fees really can stack up. And that's where, and then again, that's where when you get your email, it's just going to look just like this, and that's the reference number that you can include in that request for a fee waiver. Now, that's for the Anchorage Police Department. Unfortunately, pretty much every police department has its own system for dealing with records requests. Some are pretty good and others not so great. And there's dozens of them. And so this slide, and again, if you look at this, if you kind of come back, I'm going to make this this slide. This is a Google Slides presentation. I'm going to make it available publicly, so you can just click on these. All these links are going to be live, and you can just kind of return to this document, including my notes and like the narrative and stuff. But here are links to all the various police departments. What I would recommend is when you're emailing a police department that's one of the smaller police departments, the state law, public records law, it doesn't say that you have to write, like on your screen right now is a pretty formal looking records request. And this is the type of thing I'll send sometimes if I really have to. But the best step is to just get the email for the police chief or the police department. For the police department you're looking at, send a couple sentences email saying, I'm requesting, say you want a death investigation. Say that police department investigated the death of your loved one. Well, they created a police report. They wrote a death investigation report. You can ask for that. You could say, I'm looking for the death investigation into this person, and that's a public records request. It has all the legal force and authority of anything else, some fancy records request that I would send, to a government that's really trying to hide something. But that said, what I found is that sometimes if you are too casual, they'll kind of ignore it. And so sometimes I find it useful to send a more formal records request where I'm citing the law, like the one on the screen. I'm citing the statute, and I'm just making it look official to show them, like, look, we both recognize the law says you have to give this to me, so don't mess around. And so this screen includes a link to a sample public records request, and I'm also going to make that publicly available. So when this slide presentation is live, basically, if you click on that, it'll take you to a sample records request that you should feel free to rewrite in your own words, and you could use that as a template. Now, state troopers are also going to have a lot of the cases that we're going to be interested in, and they have their own process. Here are some of the folks that you might want to email, with your initial request. And again, say it's as simple as you could just email these folks and say, can you please send me the police report or the death investigation into, so-and-so, the person that you're interested in. And, you might know the case number, you might not, but you can send an email asking for that. And these are the folks who I would send it to. And I would CC all of them. Like the first person, Darlene Dye, is a tribal liaison. That's a good place to start. I generally will CC everybody just to make sure nobody can say that they didn't get my email, and plus people are on vacation sometimes. And like, I tried to I try to make everyone aware of the request at once. Now they might say, okay, we would like you to go through our online portal. They have their own, troopers have their own online portal, and it looks like this. It's pretty similar to the APD one. There's a bunch of, kind of fields for you to fill out. You're gonna get these faster generally, I think, than APD. Like when you fill out the online records request through the troopers portal, they say that their median, their average time of response is about 3 days if they can give it to you. Which is it's a big if, but if they have it, you should get it within a week or so. Now, after police have kind of made their records, they've made their arrests, they've kind of done their investigation, they've made their reports, they've got their pile of public records, all that stuff is then being handed off to the court system, the prosecutors, to prosecute the case. So if charges are filed, now we're getting into the realm of court records. And generally, while the police records and trooper records, I think, are often have more information, the court records are easier to get. And so that's where a lot of our, energy ends up being spent, because we know we can get those. Once something is filed in court, it's a public record. It's in a court file. You don't have to fight for it. It's just there. This is a photo from recently the city of Anchorage was dismissing a lot of criminal cases, and cases were just kind of getting delayed. And we're really looking currently at kind of delays and congestion within the court system. And so I've been spending a lot of time in this arena lately. But I think that for these purposes, I think, it's important to realize that you've got CourtView, which, you might be pretty familiar with CourtView, which is the website, the state public website, where you can look up, basically someone's criminal record and learn information about those cases. But court records are a lot more than CourtView. There's also recordings, like audio recordings of hearings, and that might be something that could be very valuable to you. And they can be requested. So you have the right to get access to, the audio from the hours upon hours of hearings that have been recorded from every session, every case that you're interested in. And then I'll talk a little bit about, there's also these sort of secret files. I mean, there's public records, and then there's kind of public records. And I'll talk about that later, but what I'm referring to is records that they've been removed from CourtView. They're considered not really public anymore, but you can still get them. And we'll talk about how to do that. So CourtView, if you're not familiar, it's a state website where you can look up criminal and civil cases by a person's name, or if you know the case number, you can directly look up the case and start to get information about when is the next hearing, what are the charges, what is the case open or closed. You're going to be dealing with case numbers, and case numbers all have the same. I don't know why, but it took me years to kind of think about this, but case numbers are all structured the same. These are unlike police case numbers, these court system case numbers all have the same kind of formula, which is you got the first 3 digits, which is always the location. So in this case, that means that 4FA means that was a case that was filed in Fairbanks in the 4th district. If it had been filed in Anchorage, it would say 3AN for the Anchorage district. The second 2 numbers are just the year that it was filed. When that case was first, when charges were brought initially. And then you have, of course, the case number itself. And then the last 2 letters are either CI. Generally, they're either CI for criminal, this is like criminal charges were filed, or it's CI for civil, which could be anything from, like a protective order filing to like a, divorce proceeding or a lawsuit. Now, the thing I'm excited to tell you about is that's pretty new, is something called true filing. And the reason I think it's exciting is because we used to, for years and years, we would mostly have to go down to the courthouse to get all of the court records. You could file requests, you could get stuff by email sometimes, but the fastest way was always to just actually drive down to the courthouse. But that's a huge hassle. And also you might want records from a courthouse that you don't have access to. Maybe you're in Anchorage and you need court records from Nome, or you're in Nome and you need court records from Anchorage. Well, True Filing is this online, it's a little bit similar to CourtView, but it's kind of meant for lawyers. But I talked to but reporters are starting to use it. I know Antonia uses it. And I talked to the court system spokesperson about this session, and they said, they're encouraging you, MMIP families, to sign up for this service. And so this is the website, akfile.truefiling.com. You can go there. You're going to be asked to create you're going to ask to apply to be part of it. There's no fee or anything, but just you need to register basically. So you're going to be asked to fill out this application thing, which is your name. It's going to ask for your organization. Don't worry about that. It'll ask for your address and city. And then this is kind of a key thing. It's going to ask for your professional credentials, which when I first encountered this, I thought I was doing something wrong because none of these apply to me. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a court reporter in the sense not that type of court reporter. Don't worry about that. Just click the one that says I'm filing on behalf of an attorney. That's the one that the court system is suggesting that you click. It's the one that I clicked on. And you're probably going to get approved. And once you get approved, now you can start to look up cases, and you could just download the documents from those cases from your computer at home without all this other baloney. You won't have to file a records request. You could just, you want to see the charging documents, you can just download it. It's going to save you time. There's one step where you're going to look up a case in True Filing, and the first step, it's going to look like there's nothing there. It's going to say 0 filings, but don't worry about that. Click on the thing that says add myself as a connected user. And what that's doing is that's adding you. It's basically you're saying, I need access to this case, and you're going to be listed as one of the people who has access to these documents. So, when the defense attorney, when the prosecutor, the judge, or whoever, whenever they look at this case, they're going to see your name on there that you're also paying attention to this case. And then you're going to be able to look at the filings, and you're going to be able to download things like the charging documents. And this is mostly, what's not great is this is not useful for really old cases. This is mostly useful for cases that have been filed since the state started using True Filing. So if say it's a 15-year-old case, a cold case, this is not going to, you're not going to be able to download documents in this way. That's unfortunate, and maybe that'll change. But for now, it's mostly kind of more current cases. And so in terms of the records that are sort of public, sort of secret, sort of public. Well, actually, let me back up. First, I want to say I still think it's a good idea to go to the courthouse. Visiting the courthouses, there's no substitute for just being able to look at the file. You have a file that you're interested in. Sometimes those files are as big as a phone book. It's actually unlikely that you're going to be able to kind of get all that stuff digitally. Sometimes it's just useful to walk into that courthouse, have the case number for the case that you want to look at, and ask for that file and just read through it. And there might be things you weren't aware of. There might be hearings that you never heard about. Letters, people submit letters in those filings. There's no substitute for just looking at those case files sometimes. So in Anchorage, and as a member of the public, you have every right to go to the courthouse for research purposes. You don't have to be there for a hearing or whatever. You can just walk into the clerk's office and say, I want to look at this case file. And that's your right. So in Anchorage, that means going to Nesbitt at 4th and I. And one thing I wanted to tell you about is when you go into those courthouses, the computers, at first it seems like they just have CourtView on them. But for a long time, I thought I would walk in there and I just thought all those computers just had CourtView, and it was a way to look up things on CourtView. But inside those lobbies, the computers actually have a bunch of additional information, and that is really valuable information. So say you go, say you look up a case on CourtView, you can look up the case, and there's going to be information about the documents that were filed. But when you actually go into the courthouse and sit down at one of those computers and use it just like CourtView, what you might see is on the side, there might be these little icons that show images. And that means that you can click on that and actually see that document. And then what I do normally is I'll just take out my phone and I'll take a picture of that document. And that's how I make a copy of it. And if you're allowed to do that. If someone tells you you're not allowed to do that, tell them they're wrong, because you're allowed to make a copy of that document with your phone. This is what the lobby at the Nesbitt looks like. So these are the computers I'm talking about. Like when you walk into the Nesbitt courthouse, you just take a right, you go through security, and then there's that clerk's office on the right. And you've got these computers, and across from these computers, you got a few people who they're there to help you and look up cases for you. But when you sit down at one of these computers, you're going to see it's going to look like this. It's going to say Alaska Court System Kiosk, and it's going to look a little like Court View where you can search cases. It's also going to have on the lower right-hand side there, it says TrackMan Public. And that's what's going to happen is when you have a case that you want to look up, either they're going to give you a paper file. Well, let me back up. Either they're going to give you a paper file, or they're going to say, oh, you know what, that case is digital. We've already scanned that case in, and you're going to look, and they're going to walk you to another computer in that same lobby, and you can just sit down and look at all the pages in the case file on that computer, and you can print those out. But to begin with, go ahead and sit down at the courthouse computer, click search cases, and then the first thing you'll notice is it looks like Court View, but then look at that thing on the bottom. It says search not published trial court cases. And that's the part that's different than your computer at home, is you can look up cases that are no longer public. And that's because there's this part of the state public records law where, let's say you're accused of a crime, you're charged with a crime, and you go to court and you're found not guilty of every count. Every count was dropped, or the case was dismissed altogether. Like that story I was talking about earlier, the city of Anchorage they were dropping hundreds of cases because they didn't have enough lawyers. So all those cases, they're all gone from Court View now. You can't look up those domestic violence charges that were filed just a year or two ago. But if you go to the courthouse and sit down at this computer and search not public trial court cases, and you can search a person's name, you might see 5 cases that were filed against them that have all been dropped. And you can take those case numbers and take them to the clerk and say, I want to look at these cases. Because sometimes what you're going to find is that someone has been accused of something a lot, but they just never got convicted of it. And there's no longer any public record except sitting in that courthouse. So I would recommend doing that if there's someone you're really interested in learning if they've been accused of things that have not been made public or are no longer public. This is what the case file looks like. They might hand you, if the case file is just a paper copy, this is what they'll hand you. And these things can be huge. But I would encourage looking at both, reading through it, looking through both sides, because there's just sometimes there's filings in there that you would never even think to ask for. And then lastly, with court documents, if you can't get in any other way, if you can't get them through true filing, if you can't get to the courthouse, or the courthouse is not in your town, you can file a public records request, a written request for everything in a case file. And it looks like this. This is what the request looks like. There's a special form for it. Unfortunately, there's different forms for different courthouses. So that makes things a little more complicated. So if it's an Anchorage case, you've got to use a certain form. If it's a Fairbanks case, you've got to use a certain form. Most of the court system, most of the courthouses off the road system all use the same form. So at least that's a little bit easier. But there's links. There's going to be links in this presentation to each of those forms. You can download these forms. I'm also going to include my contact information at the end here. My email is khopkins@adn.com. And if you ever need one of these forms, just email me and I'll send it to you. You can also request, as I said, there's audio available to you of the different court hearings, and that can be a really important record in my opinion, because sometimes when you're looking at that case file, this stuff is all written, a lot of it's written in legalese, and there'll be triangles and symbols. And you're like, what does this mean? And you can't make sense of the notes. Sometimes you can't even read the notes, like the handwriting of the notes from some hearing. And so you want to just hear what happened. You want to hear it in real time. So you might want to get the audio from the hearing. And in that case, you got to file a different type of form. Here are links to those forms. It's a little complicated because you need to know the date of the hearing, what type of proceeding it was. Was it an arraignment? Was it a sentencing hearing? Which judge was it? And then you're going to need to know something called the log number, which is like that tells them how to find that specific recording, because they record so much stuff. They need a really kind of granular, specific piece of information to know which recording to pull. And that's where, when you look in the case file and you're looking at information on a hearing, you might see references to a log number. It kind of looks like this sometimes. That's what that's for. So if you want audio, be sure to grab that log number, and then you're going to include that in the form. And again, if you have any problems with this part of it, please feel free to email me, and I'm happy to kind of help you fill one of these out or file it. This is another example of what log numbers can look like in a filing. And then one thing the court system mentioned that I thought was interesting about, for this session specifically, is they said, look, remind people that you can record a hearing yourself. If you're going to court and there's a case you're interested in, you're attending it in person, you have the same right to record that as the news crews do, as I do, but you do have to file requests to do that. The judge has to kind of authorize it ahead of time. And they sometimes they are sticklers about that. They don't want you recording without permission, but they always give permission in my experience. So I've included a link to that form here. Real quickly, the one thing I was not aware of is that the Office of Victims' Rights actually does get priority when it comes to public records. They get things from APD before, they kind of cut to the front of the line with public records in some ways. So if you're eligible for their assistance, that's something you might want to consider. You might want to consider asking, the Office of Victims' Rights to help you get documents in a case. They can't give you anything that's not a public document, but they can give you public documents, and they do get them first. But one thing Antonia mentioned was that, you have to qualify for their assistance. And so it's not a sure thing that's going to work, but it might be an avenue worth exploring for you. Relatives of a victim can ask for assistance, but there have to be charges filed in order for that case to be applicable. Real quickly, I also wanted to mention a website that I use a lot in my reporting is VineLink or Vine. And it's really simple. It's just a website that tells you if someone is in custody in an Alaska prison or jail and which institution they're in. So if you need to know if someone's incarcerated right now, this is where you find that information. VineLink, just vinelink.com. You'll select the state of Alaska. You can search the person by name. You're going to get a record that looks kind of like this. It's going to say, yeah, this person is in custody. They're at Cook Inlet plea trial. And then you can sign up to get notifications if their status changes. So say that person gets moved, say they're let out on bail. You can sign up to get notified to find that out. So that's, it's a service, of course, that is super useful for survivors of domestic violence, but for your research and your public records efforts, that can also be very helpful. You also say you're researching a person and you want to maybe rule them out in terms of was this person, free at the time of, an incident that you want information on. You can email the Department of Corrections. You can email betsy.holly@alaska.gov and say, hey, can you tell me the dates of incarceration for so-and-so? And that's also public record. The dates that a person is incarcerated and where they're incarcerated, those are public records that are available to you. And they can just help you fill in some blanks or answer some questions you might have. It looks like this when you get it. It's just a list of dates, when someone was moved, when they were incarcerated. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. These are my links. Just some links that we talked about. Again, I just encourage people to be a squeaky wheel. The law says you can just send an email, ask for a public record, and they got to give it to you. But in reality, I think, it behooves you to just keep asking, and that tends to work best. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm sorry that took so long. Thanks for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Yay, thank you so much. I know you can't see all the people, but I'm gonna give you a hand. This was so informative, and I wish that I had emoji reactions while you were presenting. There were times I laughed and times that I was like, wow, I didn't know that, you know. So thank you so much and appreciate your generosity and being willing to share your slides, and the hyperlinks will be embedded in there for folks. We do have a few questions, and I also want to acknowledge that Deborah joined and we added you as a panelist if there were things you wanted to help field or add. We have a little bit of time, but I wanted to look at where'd my Q&A go? Let's see. There were a little bit of conversation in the Q&A about nonprofits being able to help with costs or not, you know, in different, and it will depend on the state, of course. And it seems like we had someone from out of state. I think Becky jumped off, but she was sharing some of her experiences working in other states. There was also a question about NamUs, which is a federal database, and I'm not sure if that's a good question here, but they were asking if there were unidentified or unclaimed remains from NamUs, if the public were able to review photos and details from those case files. And I thought that's a great question. And I let people know NamUs is on our queue for a future webinar. We've been in contact with them to do a training. But if you know any information on that, I mean, please share. But we can also field it for later when they join us.
Should we give Deborah a few minutes to share some knowledge about her record keeping at APD?
Yeah, Deborah, thanks for joining.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks for that great presentation, Kyle, and thanks for holding this space. Yeah, I just wanted to add a few things. I think Kyle summed up most of it. Just a few smaller things. You can also call that records number, APD records, if you want to get the detective or sergeant's name or phone number. And you can call and leave messages with them to say, hey, what's going on with this case? What's the status? That's also really helpful if it's still classified as open and your record gets denied. You can kind of push it from the detective or the sergeant side to see, like, you know, if they're able to kind of either say, hey, go ahead and give it to this person, or, you know, suspend the case. When a case is suspended, we treat it as closed for records purposes. So definitely give that records number a call for the case number, like Kyle said, or the detective or sergeant's name and phone number. Another thing is people kind of get confused with requesting reports versus requesting records. Reports are just like the police reports that the officers write, but records is everything. So search warrants, arrest warrants, all the officers' notes, so many other different things. So be careful with your words when you're requesting things. It's good to say all records or the case file or all documents on the document side. And when you make that separate request for audio and video, to, you know, to list what things that you want from there. For the waivers for indigency, the fee waivers, you can also, you know, write a note or type up a note and put that into your request. You can upload that file into the request rather than emailing the APD records inbox. That should work too, as long as we can link it to a request. So, you know, we just want to make sure that it gets matched with that request. So it's easier if you just write that into your request, into each request, that you're requesting a fee waiver due to indigency. So, and then there are, when you go to anchoragepolice.com to request those records, there's a link for consent forms as well. Those generally aren't needed if it's, you know, more regarding somebody else. But you can upload a consent form if you want to leave in your information, if you're in the police report. And also generally it doesn't matter if you're family typically or friends, if you're also just researching a case or curious about it or, you know, something like that. We don't, the public records laws apply generally to everyone pretty equally. So we wouldn't usually deny a case just because you're not directly related or something like that. Now, juvenile cases are a little bit unique, and those can require consent forms and, you know, by the guardian. And then two other things are crime analysis requests. So if you're requesting statistical data or those kinds of things, you can also request that in our portal through APD. If it's a really extensive request or we don't have that data on file, you might get a like outlandish amount of a fee charge because it's going to take 200 hours of research to pull all that information from reports from the last, you know, however many years you're requesting. But it doesn't hurt to request it. It shows that, you know, people are wanting this information, and it might kind of encourage the crime analysis unit to start tracking that information in the future. And then another thing, definitely, like Kyle said, be that squeaky wheel, keep asking. If you're not getting things in time or you're getting things denied and you don't think it's fair, there's a complaint form on the Anchorage Police Department website. You can use that. Those complaints go up, and sometimes, you know, that can help. Another thing is, you know, if you're not being heard through APD, is to go to the ombudsman, the Anchorage Municipal Ombudsman. And, you know, it's just important to, sometimes people hear no or don't hear anything and they just kind of give up. So keep pushing on, and, you know, that's how changes are made. So that's all I have.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Deborah.
Yeah, thank you so much for being willing to join us and to share that information and be transparent and encourage people to be the squeaky wheel, both of you, because it is really discouraging. And of course, like oftentimes when people are requesting this information, we know they're already in some form of grief or like under distress, you know, as a baseline. And so just thank you for reiterating like that this is a right that people have to this information, and to continue to push it, and that even like, again, like you're saying, the documentation of showing that this has been asked for means a lot. And so I wanted that message to also carry through, as you were mentioning, like in some of the court records as well, like it shows that people are watching or that they're interested in what's happening. Which reminded me of a question that I had when you mentioned when you go inside in person to the Anchorage one and they say you can't make, if someone says you can't make copies, but you know you can, is there something you should cite, or like is that part of the umbrella of the same statute you shared, or what would be an appropriate, like, yeah, besides yes I can?
Well, I think I usually try and turn it around. If someone is saying, well, no, you can't have that, that's not a public record. Well, okay, they're all public unless there's a legal, like, unless you can point to the exemption, the exception in state law that says I can't have it. So I turn it around. I say, well, show me in writing where it says I can't do that, because this is a public record. And like when it comes to making copies, I mean, they might charge you, I guess, like to print them out. But even that they probably shouldn't, because the law says they can't treat people differently. So if I'm in there twice a week with I use like an app. I use like a PDF scanner app on my phone that is really, it's really useful for this, because I just, you know, I'm just taking pictures and it makes a PDF for me. And so are other people. So are other reporters and, you know, law clerks and stuff. And so we're all doing that. And so, and you have to be treated the same way as we are. They can't be different rules, you know? So, but I find that the response to that question is often just, well, show me in writing where it says I can't do that, you know?
Kyle, there's a question or more a comment in the box. It says, I've been threatened with arrest taking pictures at the courthouse. I had gone into the computers at the old courthouse because it was a weekend. I just kept taking pictures of the computer screen and left when the officer said that. Is there anything you want to comment on that? I know it's not illegal, but maybe clear that up.
What I would say is I would complain to the court system. because that's treating people differently, you know. I mean, I guess their response could be like, well, nobody can take pictures anymore, whatever, but they won't do that. Um, no, that's baloney. And I mean, that's the thing is like, you do, it really do, it's so arbitrary sometimes. It really depends on like which clerk you get. Are they in a good mood? For the different courts, they just kind of make up rules sometimes. So you can't do that. You gotta, you know, like, and you just be like, yes, I can. Sorry, but I can. And like, so I think it's a good idea to push back, show me in writing where this is not allowed. And then like that seems kind of outrageous if you're threatened with arrest for taking photos. And I would file a complaint, like a formal complaint, you know. I mean, maybe they need to post in, maybe that needs to be posted like in the courthouse that that's okay.
Yeah, the other thing I observed as you shared, there were lots of times where there's portals to request information. And one you acknowledge right off the bat, like this can be intimidating to do so, right? But it is a right. And then the way that the portals are structured is there's a lot of ambiguous things. Like I think that one you mentioned, clicking the box that you're requesting for an attorney or something like that. It's like, how are we supposed to know that? Or like it seems like there's a lot of opportunity to also have the interfacing of people's accessibility to information improved, because there's ones where you're none of them, you know, and yet we still have to work through these systems where just to get information and it's not actually accessible. So that was something I noticed too, is just kind of like the wonkiness a little bit on some of the ways to request is not clear at all. So
Yeah, like just the bureaucracy and like the legalese and things don't make like, you know, it's such a barrier to access, you know, like it's theoretically you have access to it, but you have to know what's the secret code and the secret sauce to kind of get the thing. And I find that I'm still learning. I mean, I'm doing this for decades now at this point. And I'm still learning things. I'm learning things from Antonia that I didn't know I could do, you know, that would have saved me, you know, like, and because there's no one to tell you, just kind of like, it's just kind of trial and error.
yeah, thanks for sharing your trial and error learnings with us, both of you. Someone dropped a document of statewide common areas in the Q&A, and I tried to copy it, but I made a mistake. So we can share that out too. And you're probably seeing in the chat, everyone, we're putting a survey in there, and this just really helps support our programming. So if you have just 1 to 2 minutes to fill it out, it really helps us. Again, this is recorded. We're going to share that out to people who registered, and then it'll also be uploaded, I believe, on our website or something like that, but we'll let you know. And we'll also send the slides out that Kyle's willing to share. So does anyone else have any other questions or comments, or my team, before we stop the recording?
I think Tatiana also has the ability to unmute people if they want to make any comments or questions in our last few minutes here.
Just raise your hand if you do.
And I also just want to add on again, thank you so much to Kyle. In my advocacy, I always find that families they don't have this information. So having it recorded and having it being quickly available to them is going to be really helpful in helping these families advocate on behalf of themselves and their families. So thank you again, Kyle.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime. And don't hesitate. Anyone who needs help like navigating any of this stuff, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm happy to, I do that a lot, like just kind of like filling out the forms, sending the files along or whatever. Happy to do it. So don't hesitate to email.
Also, we only have 6 people that did the survey, so let's aim for 10, guys. We have 20 attendees, so the survey link's in the chat, so please do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so follow our social media or check out our newsletter as well. If you go to our website, you can sign up for our newsletter, and you all will be able to see the future webinars like the NamUs one. Actually, I think our next one is at the end of the month. We're working with the Alaska State Crime Lab, and they're going to share their processes on different things like DNA processing or bone processing and things like that, just again, to get families the information that you all need to understand what's going on in these, how we can better work on getting justice. And so we're really grateful to partner with the people on this webinar series. So follow us and you can see more. And we're trying to schedule the NamUs one too, because I know that was a specific point of interest. But thanks again, Kyle and Deborah, for launching us on this first one. This was excellent. Thank you so much.
Alrighty, should we start?